I want to talk to you today about the idea that Christians ought to be the most hope-filled, faith-filled, optimistic people on the planet, and many times they are not. Many times they are negative, many times they are pessimistic, many times they are poor me, and we ought to be the most optimistic, faith-filled people on the planet, and that's where we're heading today. And to get us started, let me tell you about a story about a time when I was in, I believe, junior high and went to a church camp, and there was a mountain there in the distance, and me and my buddy kept looking at that mountain all week long at church camp and thinking, boy, it'd be fun to climb that mountain. And so on Thursday, I believe it was, of that week, we decided we'd climb that mountain. We left a little after lunch, and there was actually some power lines that went up toward the top of the mountains that we were able to follow, and we stayed right under that, stayed right on a path. And we got back just before sunset to discover that there were police and firemen, search and rescue, and all these people gathered around. And we thought, man, what in the world's going on here? Well, it turns out they were looking for us. And we hadn't told anybody we were leaving, and we'd been gone quite a number of hours, and nobody knew who we were, and we didn't come to the afternoon sessions that afternoon, and so on. And the reason it took us so long is that we saw that mountain in the distance, but what we didn't realize that there was two mountain ranges between us and that mountain range in the distance. And so we, instead of just going up a mountain and back down, we had to go up a mountain and down and up a mountain and down and up the final mountain and then down and up and that other one and then down and up and down and so on. And it took us a whole lot longer. And that mountain range is a picture of how prophecy often works. That there is an ultimate prophecy that is Christ who is coming. But there is an intermediate prophecy that is being foretold as well. So let's look at Isaiah chapter 7, beginning in verse 11. Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether it is in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. But Ahaz, the king of Judah at this point says, I will not put the Lord to the test. And it sounds very spiritual, but in fact, he does not have sincere motives. His motives are a little bit like the guy who fell off a cliff. He's hanging onto a tree and he says, if there's anybody up there, please help. And a booming voice comes from heaven and says, I am here. I will rescue you. Trust me. Put your faith in me. Let go of the branch. And he says, anybody else up there? And this is a little bit of the attitude of Ahaz, that he is spiritually saying, I will not put the Lord to the test. But the truth is, he didn't want to put his trust in the Lord. I want to show you a timeline here so we can see kind of what's going on. We're around 734 BC, this timeline generated by Logos Bible software. I highly recommend that. And we see that David is around 1000, and I've done a search for Isaiah and David, so you can see only occurrences about these two people. So you see about where this takes place. This is during the period of the divided kingdom, the most unknown period, and so you might want to spend a little time talking about, what's going on at this time, and Saul and David and Solomon and how the kingdom divided and so on. Anyway, verse 13, then Isaiah said, hear now, you house of David, is it not enough for you to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. Now there's one mountain range where this prophecy is fulfilled. Some people think it's actually Isaiah's son, that the virgin is Isaiah's second wife. But at any rate, there's a lady who's now a virgin, and she is going to give birth to a son. She won't be a virgin at that point, just through the normal course of events. She'll get pregnant and she'll give birth to a son. And the passage goes on to say, and by the time this kid is old enough to know good and bad, this problem is going to be solved. So that's the immediate context of the first range of mountains where this is fulfilled. And then the second range is clearly in the coming of Jesus. And it reminds us the virgin will conceive. Now there's some controversy around that word, because the Hebrew word can actually be translated young woman, and the RSV got themselves in trouble years ago by translating it that way. But the truth is, even if it should be translated that way, where it is quoted in the New Testament, the word is clearly a virgin, someone who has not had sex. And so the doctrine of the virgin birth is not supported only by the scripture, but also by by New Testament scripture. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. And you want to ask the question, what does this teach us about God? What does this teach us about the Christian faith? What does this teach us about Christian living? That it is all about this idea of God with us. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Skipping down to verse 11, we're going to get to chapter 9 in just a moment. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and of might. The Spirit of the knowledge of the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. And it begs the question, what success would Jesus have had in fulfilling the Father's mission for his life had he not relied on and been filled with the Spirit? And I don't believe he could have accomplished. He accomplished God's calling on the Father's calling on his life because he was filled with the Spirit. And it begs the question, what chance will you have to fulfill God's calling on your life if you are not filled with the Spirit? And we must be filled with the Spirit, and spend a little time talking about the fact that everybody is indwelt with the Spirit, but the Bible commands that we would be filled. Do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. And we accomplish God's calling on our life in this sense, the same way Jesus did, by being filled with the Spirit. In some sense, Jesus set aside, Philippians 2, his godness, at least he still's God, but he set aside part of the attributes of God. He certainly set aside